and Toyota of Hollywood.com, where we are joined by the host of the Locked On Fins podcast, also A to Z Sports NFL analyst. Kyle Krabs is with us. Kyle Krabs, the nicest member of the Miami Dolphins media, by the way, Omar. I told that to you yesterday, and of course, as always, you disagree with me. But Kyle, good morning. How you doing, my friend?
It was my New Year's resolution this year to be a lot nicer to everybody. So I'm going to set it off on a strong foot here. It's great to be on with you guys and talking some Dolphins football.
You know, it's easy, though, Kyle, to be the nicest guy when you're sitting at practice with Joe and Bo and Prisco and, those guys you're just teeing off. And you and I are just kind of sitting there and listening to everything.
Yeah, I feel like you're probably grading me on a curve. So if that's the environment, you're grading me on a curve. I think that's probably very fair.
So, Kyle, let's get down to business. The Dolphins have roughly about 9 candidates. I stopped counting because I honestly stopped caring for the head coach position. Who impresses you, and what are you looking for the next Dolphins head coach?
Yeah, I think you're on the nose, Omar, as far as, like, you can spare me the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator. It's the culture that guy helps to set, I think, is the most important thing that the Dolphins need to be worried about. They've got a pretty diverse group. I think some Dolphins fans were probably surprised to see as many former defensive background guys up on that list as possible, or that are on that list. But when you listen to some of what John Eric Sullivan, the new general manager, has talked about, are the things that are important to him, and you see what the body of work looks like in Green Bay when you apply that, and having players on rookie contracts, and that's kind of the lifeblood of your team. Everybody says that at their press conference,
everybody.
Right? But at least Green Bay's walked the walk, and he's been there for 2 decades.
That's
so
true.
If you're gonna bring that to life, I think a coach who is an educator, a coach who is a culture guy. You're going to have all these young guys coming in this is the way we do business. You hope you win enough so that can stick. But those are the kinds of things that it's much less about, I want a West Coast offense scheme because that's Mike ran a variation of that, or I want a guy off the Mike McDaniel defensive coaching tree. I want a guy who's going to come in and set the temperature of the room correctly, is going to have the proper standard, and is going to be committed to teaching the guys and developing the guys that they have in-house.
So with that said, Kyle, do you personally have a favorite or a group of favorites right now who Kyle Krabs think could be the best man for the job?
Yeah, I actually thought the Ravens owner spoke yesterday and talked about retreads and the idea of a retread and being aware of what their current or their past situations were. And I apply that to a name like Robert Saleh, the defensive coordinator in San Francisco. I know the tenure in New York was not particularly successful. I would challenge anybody to find one guy that went to New York with the Jets and was more successful there than he was anywhere else. I really am impressed with what they've done this year. San Francisco is like number 2 in the NFL in dead cap. They got a bunch of young guys because they moved on from a bunch of contracts. Day 3 picks, day 2 picks, a lot of guys that are playing. Nick Bosa's been hurt. Fred Warner's been hurt. And here they are in the divisional round, and they just had a great defensive effort. And they had a great defensive effort in Week 18 against the Seattle Seahawks for the number 1 seed. So I think a guy like Robert Saleh with some coaching experience, I think he brings some of those things that we talked about a little bit earlier. I think he's a name that I like, that I think the Dolphins are going to have a realistic chance to sniff, because obviously the John Harbaughs and the Mike Tomlins and those are all very sexy names. I just don't know that the stars are going to align for the Dolphins to have a chance for one of those guys.
Let's put a pin in that right there, because I want to address Robert Saleh while you talked about it.
Yeah.
Here's 2 things I want you to answer. How are you confident that he could build the right culture when he couldn't build the right culture in New York? And also,
nobody can build the right culture in New York.
Okay. Well, Rex Ryan kind of had the nice
thing out.
Hold on, Rex Ryan kind of had the right
That's where
culture.
Quarterbacks go to die.
That's true. Rex Ryan kind of had the right culture. And I'm not a huge Rex Ryan fan.
Continue your question.
Also, he selected Kyle Wilson as their quarterback.
Yep.
How are you confident that he can actually pick a quarterback after that?
Well, you have to get it right? And they went about it every which way, where it was Zach Wilson, they trade for Aaron Rodgers. I think they're very fair questions, but I What I would say is anybody that you're going to come in, unless they were a John Harbaugh or a Mike Tomlin, you're going to have some of those kinds of questions. And knowing what we know about Robert being a defensive guy, his connections to the Shanahan tree, to have assistant coaches to come in and at least be able to give you a pipeline. Because contrast that to Brian Flores. Brian Flores ran out of offensive coordinator options by year 2 here.
Correct.
Right? Because it was all bottlenecked behind.
Actually, he left.
In New England.
They left in year 1, to be honest with you. But go ahead, continue.
So if that's the concern that you have with a guy on the defensive side of the ball, he at least has accessibility and overlap with coaches that can help to, if you have the right plan, develop the right quarterback. I don't know what the plan was that went into Zach Wilson. I think it's hard to gauge, but I think it is a fair question to ask and point out. As far as the culture in New York, I would look at what that defense, just if we're just looking at the defense, because a defensive-minded coach, and you want the head coach to apply the lessons and errors that maybe you were good on your side of the ball, but you weren't good as a whole team. That defense and what it was last year versus what it was the 3 years in which Robert was there in control of the defense was a dramatically different defense. And the way in which it fell off and things fell off the rails for the Jets in 24 when Robert left, and then he was a consult in Green Bay, so he had a little bit of overlap with the Packers and John Eric Sullivan as a consult for the back half of 24. I think it's the connections. There's a little bit of a relationship that exists there, and you see what his unit has done in San Francisco with vet guys, with young guys. You saw what it did with the Jets and how quickly the defense took on his personality. I think there's some dots to connect, but it's totally fair to acknowledge that those gaps and questions exist, and they're critical questions that, some of them you hope the front office and a totally revamped Dolphins scouting effort, right? They got rid of both the co-directors of player personnel. Marvin Allen, it was reported they moved on from him yesterday. Chris Greer obviously transitioning. So their criteria for scouting is going to be dramatically different. They're going to have to carry some of the weight if you go with a guy like Robert Saleh to go about answering your quarterback question.
And who else do you like on your list? Who else do you like on the list?
I like Kevin Stefanski as a vet guy. Hard to win in Cleveland and won 11 games 2 years in Cleveland across 6 seasons. The further they got into the Deshaun Watson trade and the assets kind of dried up the roster, the worse it got. And that's how they win 8 games in 2 years or whatever it was. I think he's a pretty safe hire. I think Jesse Minter with the Chargers their unit was really respectable in what they did going up into New England, even though they lost and gave up 16 points. I think those are some guys that stand out to me. I really look at the vast majority of the list, and unless you're comparing the Harbaughs and the Tomlins of the world to the first timers or the guys that aren't those legacy guys, I think you can have pretty compelling arguments for and against each one of them. I think that's what makes it a really interesting candidate group for me.
Do you worry about the legacy guys? Like, couldn't Miami hire Chris Shula? And also, why is he such a hot name right now?
I think for Chris, it goes to some of the things that we talked about with teaching, where the Rams, and they moved on from Aaron Donald and Von Miller and Eric Weddle and Jalen Ramsey, and like they had a mass exodus out of that the year after the Super Bowl. And the way that they replace those guys is with day 3 picks, UDFAs. Quentin Lake's an example of a guy who's a secondary guy, who's a safety out of UCLA, who they just paid a contract extension to, who's like a 6th-round pick. I think about Jordan Fuller at safety, who was really good with them and then didn't hit when he left in free agency to go to other places. That kind of player development, I think that's where the Rams have really kind of refueled themselves, is they're really good at identifying guys that fit what they want to do and then developing those guys. And Shula's role in that as the defensive coordinator the last 2 years. Also for a unit, I think they ranked 31st in cash spent on the defensive side of the ball this year. So it's not like it's rookie contract guys and not a lot of dollars with expensive vets. So for them to perform the way that they have and to come out of a transition where they were all in with a bunch of vets, get the young guys in and develop those guys, where it's Verse and Fisk and Quentin Lake in the secondary and Jacoby Durant, they have overhauled that whole unit, really. And I think that's where Chris probably is able to hang his hat as the defensive coordinator, and before that, some of the I think he was the pass defense coordinator and the pass rush coordinator. He had a couple different roles there before he got to DC.
Kyle Krabs here with us on QAM. He's the host of the Locked On Dolphins, Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. He also provides NFL analysis for A to Z Sports NFL. You can follow him on Twitter at Kyle Krabs, Crabbs. Kyle, we were talking about this earlier, and I just want to get your opinion on this. I guess two parts to this question. The first is, what happened between when the Dolphins rolled Mike McDaniel out there on Monday to answer all these questions from people like Omar about his future and being involved in the GM search and all this different stuff? What happened between then and Thursday when he was fired? Did they not have any idea on Monday that he was going to be moved? And my thing is, like, if you're going to fire the guy, if you have any inkling that you're going to fire the guy, why not just do it on Black Monday? And then the second part of that is, are you surprised that he has this much interest from all these other teams?
I'll start with the second part because I don't know how well educated I could speak on the first part of the question, but I do have some thoughts on kind of what Mike said and how it spread around. Mm-hmm. I'm not overly surprised that there's teams that need a little bit of juice in the offensive side of the ball, or a team like Tennessee with a talented young quarterback in Cam Ward that see Mike McDaniel's out there. I think he has a decent chance at whether it's Tennessee or Cleveland, or depending on how the cards fall. I know Atlanta, it sounds like they like Clint Kubiak, but they have their eyes, who's the offensive coordinator in Seattle, but they have their eyes on some of the vet coaches to maybe land. And if they don't get one of those and Kubiak goes elsewhere, like maybe Mike could land in Atlanta. I think Mike has redeeming qualities. I think Mike has a lot of creativity, the run scheme being what it is. I just think with what the Dolphins needed to do and have a full reset and have everybody on the same timeline, you accept the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. And I think Mike and the redeeming qualities in which you could have built the argument for him to stay, it didn't, in my mind, outweigh the chance to get everybody starting fresh, blank slate, no conflicting timelines on how quickly we need to compete, and give yourself an honest chance to do it the right way. So not surprised with what the league consensus seems to be right now on what some of the Dolphins personnel is and what Mike did with it for 2 years in 22 and 23, that he has a lot of interest for some teams that maybe need some juice on the offensive side of the ball. As far as the Monday to Thursday saga, Mike said he was going to be a part of the process. And then when I wish I remember who it was that asked the follow-up question, but they asked him, are you providing names? What are you doing? He said, I'm going to be a resource for those who are making the decision. And that, I thought that comment stood out because we had some reporting on who's going to be sitting in on the interviews, and Mike's name was not included. And then he said he was not providing names or recommendations, just he had overlap with some of the candidates, and he was going to be a resource for those that were making the decision. So it felt to me like that comment, the first comment, I'm going to be a part of the process, kind of caught on like wildfire. And then the more that he talked, I think he gave some more context that maybe gave you some clues that was not, oh, he's going to be sitting in on the interviews or the meetings or this or that. But it's the first quote that always goes viral that catches like wildfire. And then the context that follows behind it doesn't go with the same pace. And I think that's how that narrative kind of got away from him a little bit.
In terms of Mike, what do you think is the best situation for him? Do you think he should sit it out or get right into the mix or become an offensive coordinator? I thought he was going to go to Washington because he's got a great deal of respect there, but that doesn't seem to be the opportunity. Keep in mind that Matt Ryan did have his MVP season with Mike on the staff. So maybe that's an outlet for him there. Do you think he just needs a new that sounds disrespectful. Do you think he just needs do you think his approach works, player empowerment? And do you think it's just a situation of, well, his quarterback's arm died on him?
Well, I certainly don't think that helped. I think any kind of coaching style can work with enough time and the right people identified and targeted and being brought in.
Okay.
And we were going through all the culture stuff last year, and the talk was, Well, you got vets from guys in a bunch of different places that are used to doing things a bunch of different ways, and that became like a disproportionate amount of the roster. In hindsight, like I don't think you did yourself any favors there if you're going to be kind of I don't want to say hands off, but it's in your hands type of culture in the locker room with a bunch of guys that are used to doing it in different ways because you have a bunch of vets in there. I think the best job for Mike, in my opinion, is not a head coaching job, but that offensive coordinator spot in Detroit with an offensive line. You got a two-headed monster at running back.
Yeah.
Jared Goff is really good throwing the play action in breakers. That's kind of where he's buttered his bread, and obviously that's what Miami was so successful with early on. And then you get a chance to be in proximity to Dan Campbell
and alpha male. Yep, absolutely.
Kind of detach yourself from that stigma of what your culture was in Miami, which I think is a really under-talked about point publicly about Mike's resume right now as a head coaching candidate. But I think it'll probably be more important to the teams than what the public sees as just, the creative offense. So I think for Mike, his forecast, his ability to have a really successful stint and change some of the narratives in the league around him, I think Detroit's offensive coordinator spot is the best post.
Kyle, before we let you run here, I just want to get your thoughts on this national championship game we got coming up down here on Monday. I know you follow the draft and scouting very closely here, Locked On Podcast Network. What are your thoughts on this matchup here? I know Indiana comes in big favorites, but Miami is playing as well as anyone right now, and they have some serious horses on both sides of the football. Where do you see this? How do you see this game shaking out here?
I think the matchups are really intriguing because I think there's some things that the Canes have on their roster that weigh in their favor. When you consider Mesidor and Bane as the pass rushers and how routinely, especially at the college level, you see really successful quarterbacks, but if their offensive line can't handle the rush, the way that totally derails, like the Michigan-Washington national championship game from a few years ago where Michigan had Aiden Hutchinson and just Michael Penix was it was a high-flying offense, but they never really found the rhythm. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of the blueprint for the Canes in this game. And then on the other side of the ball, what Miami has with the mass on the offensive line and the physicality and the way to run the ball, plus they're at home. Like, I would not be surprised if the Canes end up pulling this thing off. I think it's very easy to look at how well that offense is humming. I know Kurt Cignetti's done an amazing job with the transfer portal and bringing guys in, and they have a roster full of guys that are more mature than a lot of other college teams. But I think Miami's explosiveness and power on the trenches on both sides of the ball has a chance to offset that. I think it's going to be a really good game.
Two more for you, Kyle. I'm sorry. I just want to get your opinions on the quarterbacks here if we can. Mendoza on the Indiana side. We hear there's a lot of people have different opinions on him. How good is he as a college quarterback, and how good do you think he will be as an NFL quarterback?
I think he's very comfortable in the system that they run there. You could tell he's a really high IQ guy as far as processing. You listen to him talk about some plays that they've had throughout the course of the season and how he recognizes coverage before the snap and what his plan is, and he understands where to go with the ball. I think he's okay physically as far as he's obviously not a huge quick twitch guy. He's got a little bit of a longer release. He's got a good arm as far as the strength, but not a great arm. I think he's got a great pedigree to be an early draft pick at quarterback. And I think the mental side of the game is where he's most refined and impressive. Now, what that looks like when you change schemes and go to the NFL and the speed of the game's a little quicker, we'll find out. But I think he's comfortably projected right now as the first overall pick to the Raiders, who desperately need a quarterback. And I think based on who's in the class as of right now, I think that's appropriate. As far as Carson Beck, I really appreciate the way that he has gone about making some big plays. I'm being nice.
Omar, let him finish. Shut up, Omar.
Let the man talk.
All right. Man. My bad. By
the way, you're banned from any
Friday,
any Canes-related show.
Yeah, you're out Friday, Omar.
Right,
sorry.
Go ahead, Kyle. Sorry.
I think Carson Beck his experience at Georgia lends well for moments like the 2-minute drive in the last game that they had to go down and win the football game. I don't think his accuracy is great. You could tell he had an elbow injury to his throwing arm. I don't think his arm quite looks like it has the same pop as what it did before that injury at Georgia. I think he's probably a day 3 guy, but the experience that he has allows him to be comfortable in the moment. And I think you saw that with some big moments, but I think he's a much better college quarterback than he is a prospect for the pros, in my opinion.
Ruben Bane, he'll be decent in the pros, right?
Oh, he's a monster.
How
He's
high?
got really
How high?
really heavy hands.
He'd be the first guy off the board that's not a quarterback, right?
You're not worried about the short arms? I've heard that narrative getting thrown out for him.
He's not going to impress at the combine.
He's not going to have like the all-world measurables, right?
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I think there will be some teams that talk themselves into having some concerns there, but with what he's able to do, and like Miami has shown some ability to kick him inside and rush him inside if you're worried about having the length, and that when you rush inside, it can be a little bit more about just having a small surface area and that first step quickness. And then if you have heavy hands, you can kind of create that angle for yourself to get off a block. I think there's enough avenues there with really good leverage and power. And I think he's a high football IQ guy that I think he pretty comfortably for me would be in the conversation for first defensive player off the board. Probably top 10, top 12. I wouldn't go any further than 12. I think he'd be a really good pick for the Dolphins if he's there with what their pass rush unit looks like it's going to be in 2026.
Kyle, thank you for the time, man. Really appreciate it. I am very sorry you had to talk to Omar this morning.
You got me banned, Kyle. Damn.
Kyle, thank you. We appreciate it, man.
I'm innocent. I did nothing. Blame Hollywood.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right, Kyle Krabs there from the Locked On Fins and Locked On.
I got to make it better, Dono. I got to earn your vote back.
By the way, you got yourself banned. Don't be blaming Kyle Krabs for that.
Yeah, man. You keep taking swipes. I mean, man, oh man. You're just digging your hole. You got the big shovel out this morning, Omar. We got to take a pause. Joe is going to join us in the 9 o'clock hour. Hopefully he'll have some strong words for Omar as well. And we'll ask Joe his opinion if you should be banned
we get
for
Joe's
Friday
vote
as well.
Yeah, right.
We'll talk to him in the 9 o'clock hour. It's coming up here on QAM.